80s, they found out the Indian Ocean was on the other side of Africa. This discovery gave them a fast and cheap trade route to the rich goods of Asia. During Portugal's rise in power, a group of European scholars thought the Earth was smaller than what was previously believed. This meant one could reach Asia by sailing west. Because of the newly invented printing press, Columbus read about these recent theories and was enthralled with the idea of sailing west for riches. He tried to get funding for an expedition from Portugal, but King John didn't believe in the small Earth theory. He then tried in France, England, and Spain with no luck until 1492 when the Spanish sovereigns, Ferdinand and Isabella, decided to help fund 3 ships for a voyage. They saw Columbus as a means to compete against Portugal's success. The Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria set sail on August 3, 1492. After a stop on Gran Canaria, the rest of the trip took 5 weeks. On October 12th, land was spotted. It was an island, and at dawn Columbus went ashore. Because he believed in the small Earth theory, Columbus thought he was near Japan. He called the natives of this island Indians because India was what many Europeans called Asia at the time, but the natives were really called the Taino. Trade began between the two parties, but it was clear that the Taino did not possess the fabled riches of East Asia. However, some of them wore gold as jewelry. Columbus was hungry for gold to bring back to Spain. He wandered around searching for a large amount of gold until the Santa Maria crashed into a reef on Hispaniola. Columbus left 39 men at the site to build a colony. He promised he would return for them and sailed back to Spain. When he arrived in Europe, Columbus was famous. He had sailed into the unknown and returned to tell the tale. He brought back many things to show the Spanish king and queen, including Tainos he had kidnapped. But he did not bring enough gold, so Ferdinand and Isabella equipped Columbus with 17 ships for his second voyage, and named him governor of all the lands he discovered. Columbus was an excellent sailor. He found his way back to Hispaniola using his own keen navigation skills, and kept the coordinates of his route a secret. When the fleet arrived at Hispaniola, they found out that the 39 men who were left there to build a colony had been killed by a local chief. They also found out the same chief had lots of gold on his land. Columbus led a crew into his territory and found a gold quarry. The chief was angered by the arrogance of these invaders, and soon fighting broke out. To intimidate the chief, Columbus captured 3 of his captains and beheaded them in public. This enraged the Tainos and disturbed many of the Spanish. To make things worse, there was soon no gold left to mine. Columbus sent letters back to Spain on a ship and exaggerated the amount of gold that was found. To produce more profit for the king and queen, Columbus suggested starting a slave trade. Without waiting for a response, he seized over 500 natives and sent them to Spain. Most of the remaining natives fought against this injustice, so Columbus unleashed terror on them. Once defeated, they were forced to pay tributes of gold to the Spanish. It was worse than slavery. People who didn't find enough were punished brutally. Forced to constantly look for gold, the Taino could not farm their lands anymore. Many escaped into the hills, only to be hunted down. During the first few years of the tribute system, 50,000 natives died. Columbus's brutal command made him enemies in the colony as well as in Europe. In 1496, he sailed for Spain to defend his actions to Ferdinand and Isabella. He left his brother Bartolomeo in charge of the colony until he returned. The king and queen listened to his defense and allowed him to return to Hispaniola in 1498. By now, the colony was a disaster. Bartolomeo was just as bad at governing as his brother was, if not worse. A rebellion had begun among the Spanish, and soon the king and queen sent a royal investigator to assess the situation. He put the Columbus brothers on trial. They were found guilty of numerous crimes against both the Spanish and the natives. The brothers were arrested and sent back to Spain. Christopher Columbus was no longer in charge of the New World. Now old and humbled, he was allowed one last voyage across the ocean, but he was not permitted to return to Hispaniola. He explored the Caribbean for 2 years before sailing back to Spain, where he died in 1506. We have learned that Columbus was ambitious, intelligent, and courageous, but he was no hero. His exploits in the colony were disasters for the native inhabitants, and their way of life was destroyed by his actions as governor. But his efforts led Europe to dominate the world through colonization and the expansion of kingdoms into empires. If Columbus did not succeed, someone else would have. But since his journey was the first to establish a link between the old world and the new, his name is remembered.
Monday, October 12th is Columbus Day, which we've celebrated in various parts of this country since the 18th century, even before it became a federal holiday back in 1937. And that's probably long enough. Because when you find out the actual facts of what Christopher Columbus did when he got to America, you're going to see that it's one of the darkest chapters in America's history. Now, I've got a lot of these facts, Cenk, so feel free to just cut me off when you want to interject. But first of all, let's start with something light. Columbus initiated the transatlantic slave trade in early February 1494, first sending several dozen enslaved Tainos, these are the native people of the island that he landed on, to Spain. Columbus described those he enslaved as well-made and of good intelligence. He ordered 1,600 of them rounded up and had 550 of the best males and females, according to one witness, Michel de Cuneo, chained and sent as slaves to Spain. Of the rest who were left, that person writes, the announcement went around that whoever wanted them could take as many as he pleased, and this was done. And understand that significant numbers of even those early slave deliveries ended up dying en route.
Okay, so let me come in there with a couple amazing things here. First of all, Columbus also described the natives that he ran into when he first discovered this land. If he discovered it, how come they were already there? Anyway, he said they were, quote, so full of love and without greed. And you would think like, oh, that's great. That's going to lead to good relations. He's like, no, idiots, he thought. They're so full of love without greed. It makes it super easy to enslave them, beat them, murder them, chop their hands off. Christopher Columbus, the original ISIS. We're going to get to that in a second. Yeah. Okay? And so he looked at their love and compassion as a weakness that he could exploit. This is the man we celebrate, right? And he says, you take the slaves and do what we want with them. Here's what they did with them according to the journals at the time. So this is history, and it's not somebody else said it about them. They said it themselves, right?
Most of the quotes you're going to see are taken from his personal journals.
In the journals of Columbus and his men, they bragged about how they would break the native women, and that they would break their will to resist after rape, after rape, after rape. And then eventually they can get the women to do whatever they wanted because they had raped them so much. Now, this is the man we celebrate, right? So now, look, when I was a kid, I was told that Columbus discovered America. I knew that he hadn't discovered it because there were people there. Even as a kid, you could figure that out. But I got it. He discovered it from a European perspective. And at least, hey, the Europeans came here, we set up America, and we celebrated it, and I celebrated it. But when I grew up, I put childish things aside. Okay, so now you want to take the blue pill, and you want to go back to thinking Christopher Columbus is a lovely guy. Understand that you're making an active choice to deny facts, history, and say, I'd like to be ignorant. That's what I would like to do, right? That's a choice you're making, okay? But now that I know the facts, well, obviously I changed my mind on Christopher Columbus because no one ever told me what the real facts were. You find out the real facts and you go, you would have to be a monster to want to celebrate this guy.
Yeah, they leave it out of the elementary school textbooks. But yeah, so we have more barbarity, but the fundamental facts, as you pointed out, he did not discover America. First of all, other Europeans had already been to America at that point, and as you point out, well over 100 million native people had already been living there. They had discovered it first, actually. They did not think that the world was flat at that point. They had not thought that for over 1,000 years, so he was not brave in being willing to go over the edge of the world. And he did not go on a mission of exploration at all. It was a commercial enterprise and a religious enterprise to find gold and to find slaves and to convert them where possible. Now, the initial slavery that we talked about proved to be unprofitable, but he later wrote, "Let us in the name of the Holy Trinity go on sending all the slaves that can be sold." So there you get both the religious and the commercial considerations in one sentence. When the slavery did not pay off, he turned to a tribute system, forcing every Taino of 14 or older to fill a hawk's bell with gold every 3 months. If successful, they were safe for another 3 months. If not, Columbus ordered that they be punished by having their hands chopped off, or they were chased down by attack dogs. As the Spanish priest Bartolomé de las Casas wrote, this tribute system was impossible and intolerable. They not only had their hands cut off, by the way, but they were forced to wear them around their neck on thongs. A little bit barbaric there.
Okay, now imagine if ISIS had cut off hands, which they do, right, from time to time. So does Saudi Arabia, by the way, one of our top allies. And then they made the kids, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, wear the hands around their neck. And then they said, well, I'm only chopping it off because you didn't give me enough money, enough gold, enough bribes, right? Yeah. And then they rape the women. They do this to the kids, to all the adults. And then they sick dogs on them, rip their flesh from their body as we all watch. Now, we would rightfully call them monsters, the worst of the worst, right? Now, when Columbus does the same exact thing, we name a national holiday after him.
Yeah.
Again, if you didn't know, I didn't know either, right? It's okay. You're not a bad person. We were all told, hey, Columbus, hey, it was wonderful Italian, comes here, discovers America.
Explorer, brave.
Brave, all that stuff. It's okay. You didn't know. But now you know.
Yeah.
But now you know. You can't celebrate that guy.
Yeah. Now, there's more that they have to know, unfortunately. This is another section from Christopher Columbus's personal journal. He wrote, 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand. So they had set up some sort of system of pimps and sexual slavery in the New World. Eventually, he went back to Europe and then returned with more men after saying that he could conquer all of the natives because they had so little experience with war that he needed just 50 men and so that he could govern them. On his second trip to the New World, he brought cannons and attack dogs. If a native resisted slavery, he would cut off a nose or an ear. If slaves tried to escape, he had them burned alive. Other times he sent attack dogs to hunt them down, and the dogs would tear off the arms and legs of the screaming natives while they were still alive. If the Spaniards ran short of meat to feed the dogs, Arawak babies were killed for dog food. Additionally, and this is one of the sources for the information, we referenced him earlier, one of Columbus's men, Bartolomé de las Casas, was so mortified by Columbus's brutal atrocities against the native peoples that he quit working for Columbus and became a Catholic priest. In a single day, he was an eyewitness as the Spanish soldiers dismembered, beheaded, and raped 3,000 native people. Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight as no age can parallel, he said. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature that now I tremble as I write. And the final toll for this barbarity, the slavery, the disease, the war, the killing, the torture, experts generally agree that before 1492, the population on the island of Hispaniola probably numbered above 3 million. Within 20 years of Spanish arrival, it was reduced to only 60,000. Within 50 years, not a single original native inhabitant could be found.
Wow.
Millions were killed as a result of the exploration, the discovery.
Wow.
And that's on one island, by the way. This was then spread throughout the region.
If that's not terrorism, what in the world is, right? I mean, that terrorism is so thorough, is after all the rapes and the beheadings and setting people on fire, they kill at first nearly everyone, and then eventually everyone. They kill everyone they see, okay? It's one thing to be ignorant, and that's actually something that plagues us all. We're all ignorant of different things, you know. I don't know particle physics, right? But and there's a lot you don't know and I don't know. That's okay. That's okay. If you're on a quest to learn, that's fantastic. That's exactly right, right? We're all on a quest to learn. But once you know, then it's an easy decision. If after knowing this, and you know that the contemporaries wrote this is not some interpretation later. They wrote this in their journals, right? After you know it, and you still want to say that this is a good man because I don't care because he was white or he was Italian or he did it for he's the founder of our country. I don't care. I don't care. If you don't care about this, you're really a terrible, terrible person.
Yeah.
And you still want to celebrate this guy. It would be like celebrating the leader of ISIS.
Yeah.
It really would. I mean, this is exactly what ISIS does. And he did it at a level that ISIS couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
Christopher Columbus was not the first to discover the Americas, nor was he the first to realize that the Earth is round. He was the first, however, in other exploits, namely genocide and the transatlantic slave trade. In 1492, Columbus discovered the Americas when he landed in Haiti and several islands in the Caribbean. The Arawak Indians inhabited these islands. For the second voyage to Haiti, the following year, 1493, Ferdinand and Isabella gave him the resources needed to subdue the population. When he returned to Haiti, Columbus demanded food, gold, and cotton thread, and was increasingly met with resistance. This resistance gave him the opportunity he needed to declare war on the Arawaks. With 20 hunting dogs, Horses and guns, Columbus set upon the Arawaks, tearing them up with dogs and mowing them down with volleys of bullets, and running them over with horses. Reporting back to Queen Isabel of Spain, Columbus boasted, "In the name of the Holy Trinity, we can send from here all the slaves that Brazil will hold." The Spaniards hunted Indians for sport and murdered them for dog food. Columbus would reward his officers with women to rape. Girls 10 to 12 were especially desired for rape. Columbus and the Spanish won the war, and over 3 million Arawaks were killed in the genocide. They completely robbed the land of its gold. This is the truth about Columbus that's not recorded in your history books.
On the other hand, most Americans know today is Columbus Day, at least in 47 states, although Hawaii has renamed it Discoverers Day after the original Polynesians who populated that island thousands of years ago. South Dakota calls it Native American Day, and Alaska just ignores it like they kind of do everything. But what we're really celebrating today is Taino Genocide Day, the day when Christopher Columbus began to wipe out an entire indigenous population in a way that would even make Pol Pot blush. In 1492, Columbus was on a manic hunt for gold when he set sail and eventually landed on a small island off the coast of North and South America, an island today named Hispaniola, which is split between the nations of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. As Columbus wrote in a letter to the King and Queen of Spain, "Gold is most excellent. Gold constitutes treasure. And he who has it does all he wants in the world and can even lift souls up to paradise." But when he landed in what he called the New World, there wasn't much gold to be found. But he did find something he thought was just as good as gold: people, who, in Columbus's mind, would make great slaves. So he wrote to the Spanish monarchs, "They are well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword, and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subject them all and make them do whatever we want. And here there are so many of these slaves. Although they are living things, they are as good as gold." What Columbus did to the island and the tragedy he brought to the native population there has been largely erased by time and replaced by a glorified story of a bold explorer who set out to change the planet. In reality, though, as a result of what we've learned from writings by Christopher Columbus's own men, he raped, pillaged, enslaved, and slaughtered people just to get rich. Not exactly the type of guy worthy of a Main Street parade. One of Columbus's crewmen, Miguel Queno, described the scene when Columbus first arrived in Hispaniola for the second time, and thousands of Tainos, or what were referred to as Indians, came out to greet the ships. Queno wrote, "When our caravels were to leave for Spain, we gathered 1,600 male and female persons of these Indians. For those who remained, we let it be known to the Spaniards in the vicinity that anyone who wanted to take some of them could do so to the amount desired, which was done." Queno went on to write that he took his own sex slave, a beautiful teenage girl who, in his words, quote, "resisted with all her strength," quote, end quote, leaving him no other choice but to, quote, "thrash her mercilessly and rape her," end quote. And when Columbus's men did good work, Columbus routinely presented them with their very own sex slaves. But that was just the beginning. Columbus eventually started up a global child sex slave trade, exporting Indians all around the world. As he bragged to a friend in a letter written in 1500, 100 castellanos, as the Spanish coin, are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm. And it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 years old are now in demand. Eventually, under Columbus's orders, life for the Taino on their homeland of Hispaniola became so bad that they resorted to mass suicide. As the Spanish missionary Pedro Cordoba noted in 1517, 25 years after Columbus arrived. As a result of the sufferings and hard labor they endured, the Indians choose and have chosen suicide. Occasionally, 100 have committed mass suicide. The women, exhausted by labor, have shunned conception and childbirth. Many, when pregnant, have taken something to abort and have aborted. Others, after delivery, have killed their children with their own hands so as not to leave them in such oppressive slavery. By the time Cordoba wrote those words, the indigenous population on Hispaniola had plummeted from roughly 3 million people before Columbus arrived to only 12,000 25 years later. A few decades after that, not one Taino was left on the island. An entire culture and people completely wiped off the map and largely forgotten, thanks to Christopher Columbus. Happy Taino Genocide Day.